I am Eileen Doherty, and I am the director of the Colorado Gerontological Society. And we're going to talk a little bit today about emotional well-being and a series that we have been working on a little bit for the last couple of years in terms of mental health and wellness. So we're going to start out today by listening is important in relationships. And we'll hopefully explore that a little bit and what that means. One of the things that we know that happens frequently to older adults is that they feel like maybe they're not heard in a situation. And hopefully, this will give individuals some additional tools, if you will, to be able to be more actively involved in terms of listening yourself as well as engaging with others and encouraging them to listen. So, listening is basically the ability to listen is really very important, and it's a powerful tool in relationships. Everybody wants to be heard and everybody wants to be seen. That's part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is that many of us not only need or want that, but we also crave that. And what happens oftentimes is that we look like we're listening, but we may not necessarily be listening. So we're going to talk a little bit about um, hopefully being able to do that today. So, what is listening? For some of us, this may be just really a redundant statement or a redundant idea, but what listening really means is that you are present with the individual. It's a part of a conversation in which you may or may not have an agenda, but your goal as a listener is that you are not really trying to influence the individual, but rather what you are trying to do is to hear what they are saying and to take that with some level of seriousness. So, listening is important because it is a healing tool, as I said, and we all want to be seen and heard. Many of us also have mastered, especially with this whole Zoom thing, where we turn off our cameras and we pretend like we're listening, but we're oftentimes engaged in a lot of different things. So our ability to listen is often compromised because we may be staring at the individual or we may be looking someplace else, but we're not really giving them our whole attention. Or the other thing we're doing as somebody is talking is that we're trying to figure out what our response is before we ever actually have heard what the person has to say. And so sometimes you will hear people say, don't interrupt me. Well, when you interrupt someone or when someone interrupts you, or when they don't give you time to respond, if you're thinking through carefully what your answer is, then they are not a very attentive listener. And basically, they may minimalize, if you will, your response in that kind of a situation. Um, So attentive listening, basically, it gives us this example that says that sometimes if you meet somebody and you're not particularly interested in what they have to say, or you don't think you have anything in common, if you actually listen to them, you might be able to gain a new understanding of what it is that they are thinking. You might actually learn something new and you can learn something about yourself. So just because you somebody presents an item or a discussion point in a conversation that you're not particularly interested in, it's better to practice attentive listening and try to figure out what it is that the person is saying rather than to if you will, interrupt them, and at the same time, then not gain the benefit of what it is that they're trying to share. When we listen to people, we find out that we're much more alike than we are different. And learning from other people's experiences, even if it's something that we don't necessarily know about, it can help us to make a mistake. So a few years ago, I was working with someone and they ended up in a very difficult situation and ended up in jail. And as I was trying to get the person out on bond, a lady was in the waiting room at the jail. And a very important lesson that I learned was that she and her husband were rented a car and some in Portland, Oregon, and somehow, way, shape, or form, the rental company did not record the extension of their rental, and they ended up being picked up in Denver for a stolen vehicle. And she couldn't get herself out of jail, nor could she eat because her husband had all of the credit cards. So the mistake, as she said, is we'll never go there again because one of us will always carry at least one credit card to be able to do something. I ended up buying her dinner that night because she hadn't eaten for 2 days because she was waiting on her husband because his bail bond was set at a different time. And she had no way to eat because nobody was taking or was helping her out. So again, just listening to people, taking an interest in them, appreciating what they have to say can lead us, if you will, to be a more compassionate individual. And we can always learn some effective um, points if we are willing to listen. So, what are some of the steps to being a good listener? Is that we actually want to listen. And our goal is not to respond to that individual, but rather to hear what it is that they have to say. And then to try to improve our response or our interest in that individual and working with our communication skills. So it's kind of twofold. One is you want to actually hear what the person has to say. And then, secondly, is to absorb, if you will, what it is that they're saying so that you can, um, that you don't miss that. Sorry. Well, fine. So, why is listening important? Um, Listening is important because it helps us to realize that there is conversation, and that we have not only the opportunity to learn, but in addition to that, we can avoid problems within ourselves. Conversations often, if we expand our mind, can help us to grow and expand. How should we be a good listener or an active listener? So, one of the most important things is to make eye contact. Sometimes that's very uncomfortable for people, but that is one way that the person knows that we really are interested in them and that they have our attention. A second one is to lean into the conversation. So we are actively posturing ourselves so that we have an open communication style. So not only do you want to lean forward, but crossing your arms is a no-no when you really want to be an active listener. Because what that does when you cross your arms is it creates the message that I'm not interested in you. Trying to be really focused on the individual and avoiding any kind of distractions is also important. And I know that with cell phones these days, it's really difficult sometimes because we feel like we hear our phone go off or we know we got a text or whatever. And there is this immediacy, if you will, when somebody calls your cell phone that you're supposed to respond. And so it's very conflicting sometimes to be an active listener and pay attention to the person we're working with, as opposed to taking our eyes or our thoughts off of that individual and focusing on the other distractions. Another thing is to look at and pay attention to your facial expressions. Frequently, we talk more with our eyes and our body than we necessarily do with anything else. So, the secret really to being a good listener is to focus on what the person says and to make sure that that person is the most important person in the world to you at that moment. And that is really, really hard. When I was in graduate school, one of the things that we had to learn in my counseling sessions was they told us we had 2 minutes to gain the confidence and the trust of that individual who was sitting in that counseling relationship. And a lot of times it's very important that we establish that relationship very early in a listening situation. In addition to that, if we're focusing on listening in our personal lives, one of the things that we sometimes find is that we are, again, not really focusing on our partner, on our loved one, our kids, and so we get distracted. One of the other things that happens very often when we are thinking about listening is that we are not really listening, but our mind is wandering, and we become what's known as a yes, but listener. Our goal in this yes, but listener thing is that every time somebody says something, then our response is yes, but, because we are trying to guide the conversation to the way that we want it, as opposed, again, to actively listening to that individual. Sometimes another way that we become a yes, but listener, which is oftentimes even more frustrating to the other party or other parties, is that we refuse to even engage. So we call that here the silent treatment or indifference. We don't express an opinion. We don't give any facial or bodily expressions, and we also don't make any sounds or talk. And so that sometimes is even more difficult in creating a listening relationship because the person who is speaking has no way to read what our emotions and what our response is. Uh, so the strengths of a good listener are also sometimes to paraphrase what it is that the person is telling you. We are not talking about mimicking. We are not talking about repeating back exactly what the person said to you, but rather we are talking more about your own understanding of the situation or the discussion and making sure that you have at least as clear as possible an understanding of what the person is trying to tell you. So we need to use our own words. We need to make points about it, and make sure that we have considered what the person is telling us so that we are able to actually take the action or the um, response that makes the most sense for that particular conversation. Frequently, one of the things that I try to do is to, in that situation, create also I messages. Am I understanding you correctly? Do I have this right? Is that what you need from me? Kind of thing. The other piece of it is that I find in creating a listening or a relationship like that is often to use a we kind of concept. So again, it creates that sense that I am engaged with you and that we are in this together and that I want to help you rather than creating a sense that I am a bystander in this conversation or in this relationship. It's really important to also do perception checking. So not only do we want to make sure that the person understands what, or that we understand what they are trying to tell us, but that we're able to um, be clear about that rather than to assume what it is that is going on. So another thing as part of that is to take responsibility, if you will, for our own actions in a conversation or in a relationship and to own those. That gives not only the person the opportunity to confirm what they are concerned about or what they need to let us know about, but it also then gives us the ability to make sure we're on the right page. Another thing that we need to do as part of listening, which is really, really, really important, is empathy. And empathy is basically the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes and to try to understand what they're going through, even if you don't have that experience. That connects you to the individual, it connects you to their feelings, their emotions, their suffering, their happiness, their contentment. So it's important, if you will, that you practice and understand how to do empathy. The goals of a good listener then is to be genuine. People can tell whether or not you are genuine and you're not really engaged in the conversation. And what happens when you're not engaged and you're not genuine is that that individual then loses trust in you. And you may hear what the person is saying, but it's very hard then to really understand what their experience is and their perspective if you are not genuine and you're only half paying attention. And I know that's really hard sometimes because yesterday I was having that challenge because I was having to deal with my grandchild and he was being fussy. And at the same time, I was really trying to participate in a conversation. And it was very difficult because he was having a lot of issues that needed to be tended to. Mhm. And then to sort out in terms of listening is, are you listening for the understand? That's when you are creating an empathetic relationship. Understand what the individual says. You're trying to make sure that you know what is going on. If you are listening to respond, you are kind of sometimes called that fixer. You're not really listening to that person. What your objective is in that moment is A, to get them off the phone, to get them out of your out of your house, to get them out of your room, to dismiss that individual. Um, and sometimes your goal in this is to actually try to either fix the problem or to influence their decision or their thinking or their understanding rather than to bring them to their own decision making. Carl Rogers, who is a noted psychologist around the turn of the 1900s, was very much into listening. And his thought was, or his theory was that the only way to bring about growth and change was that people had to be heard, people had to be open, and listeners had to enter into any situation without making judgment. They also have to provide a safe environment for people to share whatever it is that they are listening to, because or that someone is sharing with you. If you are judgmental, if you are not listening and trying to get an understanding of what the individual is sharing, then you are losing that opportunity for real understanding. And Rogers called this unconditional positive regard. He really emphasized, as I said a moment ago, that all conversations need to be entered into without judgment, and we have to accept what it is that the person who is speaking is sharing their views, and we need to appreciate their views rather than trying to impose our views on them. Listening is a two-way street. When we listen to what other people say to us, oftentimes they'll also listen to us. And we, as the speaker or the person in control of this conversation, frequently want to be listened to as well. So if we're a good listener, then the other person that we're in a conversation with probably will also respond or react similarly. Now we're going to move a little bit into empathy. And being an effective empathetic listener is really important. So active listening gets us in the situation where our posture, our eyes, our body, our mind is actually, focused, if you will, on what is going on. We're trying to connect, if you will, with that individual who is talking or sharing. If we pull back and we're not an active listener, we're not engaged, then that person isn't able to connect with us either. So, in empathetic listening, then it's an active process, and the listener fully engages with what the speaker says. They share words, they share emotions, they share messages. They, as I said earlier, are not judging each other, but they're genuinely interested in responding, not only with understanding, but compassion. People who engage in passive listening as opposed to empathetic listening are only partially engaged. They may be distracted, and they don't emotionally connect with the individual. So, with empathy and empathetic listening, it's important to connect, if you will, with that individual. So, this is kind of a checklist, if you will, that can help us to say, are we an empathetic listener? So how sensitive are we to what other people are saying? And we aware of what they imply but aren't saying? Because a lot of people are reluctant, if you will, to share everything. So we might not want to assume what we think they're feeling, but we want to be able to check in and get a greater understanding of how they are feeling, whether it's deeper than the spoken words or what the words that they are sharing with us actually are conveying their emotion and their deepest concerns. Processing. Do you really tell people that you will remember what they say and what they are sharing with you? Um, because again, if you are not an active listener, you cannot remember all of those points or all of that content of that conversation. Recently, I heard a documentary where somebody said that one of the things to do in terms of listening and relationships is to think about your brain as a file cabinet. And every encounter that you have with someone or something creates a file. And if that is a really important encounter or engagement, then your brain will create a file, and that file will be stored then in your brain so that you can recall that encounter or that conversation or that event. Uh, and one of the ways that helps her to improve that is basically not only do we create that file, but we put things in that file with our either agreement or disagreement with what's going on. And it helps us to remember the various points that were made and how we can um, recall those points when we need them. The third part of this checklist is, do you assure others that you are listening by giving them a verbal acknowledgement? And it should be more than an uh-huh from behind your cell phone or the newspaper. If we are actively, again, engaged in empathetic listening, then we're paying attention to what the person says, and our acknowledgement needs to be appropriate and more than an uh-huh or something that really says, I don't know what you were talking about. I don't care what you were talking about, and don't bother me. I have things to do. Again, being receptive to other people's ideas gets into this whole notion of coming to a conversation without judgment. Even though you might be very upset with the person, they may have behaved in a way that you don't approve of, try to not judge them until they have an opportunity to explain what it is that they are doing. Questioning other people so that you understand what they're doing and paying attention to their body language is also really important. So, just to review, then, an active empathetic listener is an individual that is not only actively paying attention, but the other person knows that you're paying attention. You are interacting with them with through your body language, through your conversation responses, to helping them engage in a good memory, in meaningful relationships. So you're actually communicating with that person, and you're communicating what you feel and what they feel, and you're trying to bring those to a consensus. And again, active listening, going off into la la land, falling asleep, whatever, is never going to get you into an active, empathetic listening relationship. Another thing to do as part of all of this is looking directly at the people. So, uh, and look toward them so that, again, you present, excuse me, an open posture that allows them to know that you are interested in who they are, what they're doing, and you are going into that mode of saying, yes, I know you need something. And yes, I am stopping what I am doing in the moment. And I am paying attention to what it is that this next conversation with you and me should involve. Uh, You're also really clearing your mind, if you will. So you're not just putting away your cell phone or doodling or whatever, but you're also not trying to think about what the next thing is that you have to do, or what you have to say, but you're actually focusing so you can remember what is being said in the conversation and that you can then act appropriately by responding. Um, and one of the things that really often happens in empathetic listening is if you engage and your mind is clear and you show that you're listening, then it's also easier to become engaged in what that person is trying to share with you. Empathetic listening also strengthens emotional bonds. And all of us want to be understood and cared for. We want to be safe. We want to be secure. Again, Maslow's hierarchy has taught us that there are these basic needs and that we have: food, clothing, shelter, safety, security. And by having someone who emotionally cares for us, even if it's a transient kind of thing that only happens in the moment while we're encountered with that individual, making sure that they understand that we care about them. People who are in intake situations, whether you're going to see a new doctor, whether you are walking into the grocery store, whether you're picking up medications at the pharmacy, those people, frequently they are not, if you will, engaging with you at an emotional level. It's more when you are sitting down to have lunch with someone, when you are meeting someone for a joint event that you're going to, when you're having a conversation with your family members, whether it's simply what everybody did yesterday, and you're sharing that experience, whatever it is, again, really listening and creating that safe space so that you can create that emotional bond of trust is extremely important. Research has shown that when people practice empathetic listening, that you as an individual also report higher levels of relationships and emotional intimacy. You're really paying attention to who those people are, and you can not only navigate the good things that go on, but you're also able to often navigate any kind of conflict or challenge if you are actually emotionally and empathetically attached to that individual. So, what are the benefits of an empathetic relationship in listening? As I've alluded to, one of the really big things is trust. When people feel like they are being heard, they will open up and share things that they may or may not share with other people. That sharing allows us then to create a deeper understanding of both your needs and your desires and perspective, but it also then helps you to understand theirs as well. And the Gottman Institute suggests that in couples who engage in empathetic listening, they're really able to resolve conflict and maintain positive relationships, because empathy allows for less miscommunication and more positive and mutual understanding. Empathetic relationships can also reduce stress or emotional turmoil. It can reduce anxiety because if some like difficult situations frequently are looking for that empathetic person to listen to them and emotional resilience. So practicing empathetic listening adds a few additional requirements, if you will, on your part. So one of them is it's not enough, again, to just pay attention, but we really have to be present with that individual and make eye contact. We use nonverbal cues to show that we are engaged. Avoiding judgment, as I have indicated, is extremely important so that the individual can really feel comfortable expressing themselves. reflecting and validating, making sure that we are, in fact, understanding and hearing what that person said so that they can be, so that we can acknowledge their emotions and their feelings. Asking open-ended questions really helps us then to allow that individual to elaborate on their thoughts and feelings, and then responding in an empathetic way will help with our listening skills as well. So tips to become a better listener, again, these are just kind of a summary. Put yourself inside the mind of the speaker, whoever it is that is talking in a relationship. Try to find and listen for the meaning of what it is that they're telling you. Look at their body language. Be empathetic. Don't be judgmental. Look into their eyes when they're speaking. Pay attention to the feelings associated with the words. Notice the speaker's tone and inflection. Repeat in your own words what's going on. So that you are checking yourself and making sure you're in this empathetic relationship, acknowledging that you're listening, and then occasionally summarize what they are telling you. So hopefully, in summary, there are no distractions, and that you are able to really practice this empathetic listening in a more important way than ever. Being very conscious about that will strengthen your relationships and allow you then to engage, if you will, in positive um, connections and listening to what individuals are talking about. And that concludes our remarks about active listening and relationships for today. What I'm hopeful is that this allows you as an individual, when you are in a group setting and you are feeling like you are not being heard, that if you can practice some of these active listening skills and this empathetic listening opportunity, that this will give you some better skills to be able to engage and not feel quite so minimal or not engaged, or that people don't pay attention to who you are. So I'll be really interested if anybody wants to share with me in a couple of months as you have sort of practiced some of this and if this has been helpful to you. I'm going to close today. Many of you have joined us many times before, and some are new, but this is a list of basically the services that the Gerontological Society provides. We have dental services, we have mental health counseling, we have telephone buddies. We can provide grants, if you will, for people with low vision aids. So we can help with like buying magnifying glasses and stuff like that. It's a small grant, but we still have some money to do that. We can help with advanced care planning, and soon we will be launching our holiday basket program. We recently completed our Salute to Seniors and are planning for the 36th annual event. So if you want to mark your calendars, be on August the 23rd at the Greek Event Center again. We are just promoting our Medicare Mondays, and there will be about 20 sessions, combination in person and on Zoom. So check our website. We'll also be doing a significant number of mailings as well. And our guidebook is currently being reviewed, and hopefully we'll have a new one available before the end of the year. And with that, I will close for the afternoon.